I'm Caroline Myers, and on the afternoon my daughter married into the Whitford family, I learned exactly where I stood. The valet took my keys with a practiced smile, and I walked past lanterns and manicured boxwoods telling myself to breathe. Inside the tent, Crystal caught the sun and turned it into scattered stars. I searched the gilded seating chart for my name until the gold flourishes blurred. It wasn't there. A young woman with a clipboard offered to check with the bride, then vanished into silk and chatter as if I were an uninvited thought. Madison floated through the guests in lace, and light kissed my cheek and led me past the orchestra, past the fountain, past the laughter. "Here you are, Mom," she sang. A metal folding chair waited in a service corridor beside a dented silver trash can that smelled like shrimp and citrus rinds. She nudged a potted fern toward me as a screen and laughed soft and airy. "It's just a joke." Heat climbed my neck. I smoothed my dress, the one I'd altered twice the one I bought with stacked invoices and quiet pride. A server swept by with a tray of champagne and didn't meet my eyes. I sat. The chair wobbled. Ice clinked. Somewhere, a violin slid into a waltz. I wondered how a life can narrow to a single square of linoleum and a thudding heart. I had come ready to be gracious, to let small slights pass and celebrate my only child. Instead, the Whitford estate swallowed me whole and parked me beside the garbage. It wasn't a prank. It was a placement. It told me that whatever I had been nurse chauffeur, tuition committee, winter coat provider had expired. I curled my fingers around the rim of the seat to stop the shaking. If there was a lesson waiting, I would learn it. If there was a line, I would finally see it. And if there was a truth no one else would say, I would be the one to speak it. I would not beg for space at the table. I would make room for truth, even if it broke the music. The sound of the orchestra drifted faintly even in that dim corner, but my mind slipped backward to years when music in our house came from a battered radio on the kitchen counter. Madison would curl her legs under her at the table coloring while I graded papers from the community college. Back then, it was just the two of us after my husband's accident. I learned to stretch every paycheck until it almost tore. I picked up tutoring in the evenings, balancing fractions on a chalkboard for restless teenagers, then hurried home to make grilled cheese for her before bedtime. Those nights were hard, but they were ours. She'd ask me about her drawings, about whether the sun should always be yellow, about what God might look like. Sometimes we ate cereal for dinner, laughing when the milk ran out and we had to pour water over the flakes. I told myself that love, patience, and presence mattered more than anything we lacked. Madison believed me then, and in those days I believed it too. The first cracks showed in subtle ways: a skipped Sunday dinner, a call cut short because she was already in the car. I tried not to mind convincing myself it was simply the rhythm of a young woman building her own life. But I still set the table for two every week, still kept the porch light burning, waiting for her knock. As I sat beside the trash can at her wedding, the memory of those warm, ordinary nights pressed against the cold present. I could almost hear her little girl voice asking me if angels wore shoes. That child had needed me in a way the bride no longer did. And though my body was wedged against a garbage bin, my heart kept reaching for the girl who once thought her mother hung the moon. The distance grew more quickly than I was ready for. By the time Madison met Ethan Whitford, our Sunday dinners had turned into unanswered texts. She swept into that relationship with the kind of speed I didn't recognize in her. My daughter had always been deliberate, weighing every choice, but with Ethan, it was as if she had been handed a script she didn't dare edit. The first time I saw them together was at a fundraising gala hosted by his family. The Whitfords owned half the real estate in the city, or so I heard whispered among the guests. I had been invited almost as an afterthought. I still remember standing in the foyer, my thrift store dress pressed as smooth as I could manage, feeling the eyes of women in sequined gowns skim over me like I was a misplaced extra in their play. Ethan was polite the way a banker is polite when he closes an account. His handshake was cool, his smile careful. Madison hovered near him, laughing a little too quickly at his mother's remarks, brushing imaginary lint from his jacket. When she finally introduced me, her words felt rehearsed. Later in the powder room, she hissed that I'd worn the wrong color, that I'd spoken too plainly, that I didn't understand how people like the Whitfords thought. That phrase lodged in my chest. People like them. As if I were not people at all. As if the life we'd built together on tight budgets and borrowed time were something to be scrubbed away. I left the gala early heels pinching heart heavier than the pearls around my neck. Madison didn't notice. She was busy fitting herself into a world that had no empty chair for me. Sitting at her wedding years later, staring at that silver trash can, I realized that the gala had been my first seat outside her circle. The engagement was announced barely 3 months after that gala. Madison called me on a Wednesday evening, her voice breathless, telling me she was getting married. She spoke so quickly that I could hardly place my congratulations before she hung up. By Friday, her photograph appeared in the city paper, her smile beaming beside Ethan's. The caption beneath announced the joining of 2 prominent families. My name wasn't even mentioned. I tried to stay gracious, offering to help with flowers, with invitations, with anything that might tether me to the day. Each time Madison brushed me aside. Ethan's family has it covered, Mom. It's simpler that way. Simpler, such a small word to erase decades of mothering. Then came the dress fitting. She invited me for the first appointment, only to shoo me away within minutes, claiming the boutique was too crowded. Before I left, I caught a glimpse of her reflection in the mirror. The satin clung around a curve that wasn't there the last time I'd seen her. Not dramatic, but undeniable. When I asked gently later that evening, she smiled too tightly and said 5 months along. We didn't want to make a big deal of it. The math sat wrong in my mind, heavy as a stone. 5 months did not match the timeline she wanted me to believe. Still, I bit my tongue. I wanted to trust her, to trust that she knew her own life better than I did. A few weeks before the wedding, I dropped by her apartment with a box of childhood sketches I'd found in storage. She opened the door with flushed cheeks and a phone still pressed in her hand. "You had your chance," I heard her hiss into it before she realized I was standing there. Her eyes froze. "Mom, you should have called." I left quickly, the box clutched to my chest, her words echoing louder than the street traffic outside. The wedding day shimmered with champagne light, but underneath it, I sensed a fracture. From my seat beside the trash can, I watched Madison glide through her reception like she had been born to silk and chandeliers. Her smile was perfect, her laugh arriving right on cue, with Ethan's mother's jokes, yet every so often her eyes betrayed her. They flicked past the guests, past the photographers, toward the far edge of the tent, where shadows thickened. That's when I saw him. He stood half-hidden near the bar, hands tucked into his pockets, his jacket wrinkled as though he hadn't planned to be here. He didn't belong to the polished set of Ethan's friends. His eyes never left Madison. Each time she caught sight of him, her spine stiffened. Her laughter faltered for half a second before she recovered. I searched my memory, and recognition struck like a chill Jason Keller. He'd been around before Ethan, back when Madison still called me for advice about art shows and worried over rent. Jason with his guitar case and restless sketches on diner napkins, the one who disappeared so suddenly she never spoke his name again. I leaned back in my rickety chair, heart pounding as if I'd stumbled into a secret meant to stay buried. Madison danced with Ethan under the chandeliers, but her gaze kept drifting to Jason. She wasn't celebrating. She was monitoring. I felt the weight of years press on me. The child who once begged me to braid her hair before school now carried secrets so sharp they could slice through the fabric of her marriage before it had even begun. And though I didn't yet know what bound her to that man at the bar, I could see fear etched beneath her painted smile. The orchestra swelled, glasses clinked, and I sat still, realizing the truth was closer than anyone dared admit. That night, after the wedding lights dimmed and I returned home, I couldn't shake the image of Jason's face. His stillness haunted me more than all the laughter I'd endured. By morning, I needed to tell someone, so I drove across town to my oldest friend, Linda Crawford. Linda had known Madison since she was in pigtails, had watched us stumble through years of scraped knees and late-night science projects. I sat at her kitchen table, the same one where we'd once sorted PTA bake sale money, and poured out everything the folding chair by the trash can. Madison's clipped voice, the man by the bar. Linda listened without interruption, her hand curled around a coffee mug, eyes narrowing in thought. When I finished, she leaned back and said quietly, "You remember Jason Keller, don't you?" The name spread through me like a bruise. Jason, the young musician Madison once adored. Jason, who used to bring over canvases and talk about gallery openings with a fire in his eyes. "He vanished," I murmured. She never explained why. Linda shook her head. He didn't vanish. She cut him off, told people he was unstable. But I never bought that story. He was too devoted, too gentle. Her words pressed harder against the unease that had been growing in me for months. Madison had ended things swiftly without reason, then appeared on Ethan's arm like she had been rehearsing the role her whole life. I left Linda's house with a knot in my stomach. Driving through familiar streets, I passed the playground where Madison once clung to the monkey bars until her palms blistered. Back then, she never let go without looking to see if I was watching. Now she avoided my gaze entirely. That night, as the clock ticked past midnight, I realized waiting for her to explain was futile. If I wanted the truth, I would have to find it myself. The next morning, I sat in my car outside a modest office above a florist shop, palms damp against the steering wheel. The sign on the glass door read, "Natalie Brooks Private Investigations." I had never imagined myself here. Private investigators belonged in crime shows or messy divorces, not in the life of a retired school librarian. Yet there I was, clutching a photograph of Madison, my hand trembling as I slid it across Natalie's desk. "I'm not trying to ruin her," I said quickly before the silence grew heavy. I need to know what I'm looking at." Natalie didn't blink. She simply nodded and began with the timeline. Madison had ended her relationship with Jason Keller just over 9 months ago. 6 weeks later, she appeared at a Whitford fundraiser on Ethan's arm. The dates overlapped in ways that couldn't be ignored. Then came the detail that twisted the air from my lungs. Madison told me she was 5 months pregnant during the dress fitting, but the math didn't align. If anything, the pregnancy began while Jason was still in her life. Natalie spoke with Jason's family. His mother said he'd been heartbroken, convinced Madison was carrying his child when she left him. He never received confirmation, but he never stopped wondering. I sat, frozen in the office, humming with the faint buzz of a desk lamp. My daughter had built her future on deception. She had traded one life for another and carried the evidence inside her. Driving home, the streets blurred. I kept seeing Jason's face at the reception, the way Madison's eyes darted toward him. This wasn't a coincidence. It was the shadow trailing her down the aisle. I pulled into my driveway, shut off the engine, and whispered into the dark cabin of the car. "So that's what you've done, Madison." By the time the reception reached its peak, the music pulsed through the floor, and the chandeliers cast their glow over laughing faces. From my folding chair, I clutched the slim folder Natalie had given me. The edges dug into my palms, grounding me against the swirl of doubt and dread. I told myself to stay seated to let the charade play out, but every laugh from the crowd sounded like mockery, every toast like a hammer, driving me further into the ground. Madison moved across the dance floor with Ethan, her veil brushing against his shoulder. To the guests, she looked radiant, the picture of triumph. But I watched closer. Her smile wavered when she thought no one was looking. Her eyes always sought out the shadows. Jason lingered near the bar, unmoving, a silent reminder of the life she'd buried. I rose slowly, the chair scraping against the linoleum with a screech that drew a few glances. My knees shook, but the truth steadied me. I stepped forward, weaving through tables of startled guests. When I reached the center of the room, the music faltered as though the violinist sensed something shifting. "I won't take long," I said, voice clearer than I expected. but I have something everyone deserves to know." A hush spread. Madison's eyes widened a flash of panic, breaking through her trained composure. I opened the folder. First, the ultrasound dated weeks before she ever met Ethan. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Then I held up a printed copy of Jason's anguished post, 9 months old, speaking of what had been taken from him. The silence thickened, pressing against us all. I turned toward Ethan, then to his mother. "This wedding isn't built on love. It's built on lies. The child she carries is not his." The weight of those words dropped like stone into water, shattering the illusion Madison had so carefully staged. The room seemed to tilt after my words landed. A waiter dropped a tray, the crash of glass cutting through the silence like a gunshot. Ethan's face drained of color, his eyes darting from me to Madison, as if searching for an escape route from the truth. He pulled his hand from hers, straightened his jacket, and stepped back. Ethan Madison's voice cracked, desperate and thin. She reached for him, but he recoiled as though her touch might burn. His mother moved swiftly, heels clicking like gavel strikes. She snatched the folder from my hands, scanning the ultrasound, the dates, the printout of Jason's words. Her lips pressed into a hard line. Without a word, she closed the folder, turned her gaze on Madison, and shook her head once cold, final. Then she followed her son toward the exit. Guests whispered, some covering their mouths, others already gathering their coats. The orchestra faltered and fell silent. Madison stood trembling mascara, bleeding into the lace of her gown, her body shaking in the spotlight of her own undoing. "You planned this," she whispered at me, tears streaking down her cheeks. "You came here to ruin me." I looked at her, my voice steady though my heart thundered. "No? You ruined yourself the moment you thought a mother could be replaced with a garbage can." The words struck harder than I expected. She sank to the floor, the tulle of her gown pooling around her like wilted petals. Her sobs echoed in the still air, but no one moved to help her. Not the bridesmaids, not the friends who had clinked glasses hours earlier. She was alone, surrounded by silence where applause had once been. I didn't rush to her side. For the first time in her life, I stayed still, letting her face the wreckage she had created. The morning after the wedding, the headlines had already started. Whispers rippled through the city's social pages, speculating about annulments, betrayals, the downfall of a society match that had barely lasted an evening. My phone buzzed with calls I didn't answer. I let it ring until the house fell quiet again. I spent the following days in my garden pruning roses that had grown wild during the chaos of wedding planning. The soil under my fingernails and the ache in my back felt honest grounding. It was a stark contrast to the brittle glamour of the Whitford estate. While neighbors peered over fences with curious eyes, I bent closer to the earth, telling myself that the truth, however painful, was better than living inside someone else's illusion. Madison didn't call, not once. I thought perhaps she might appear at my door demanding explanations or even hurling blame, but the silence stretched on. Each day that passed without her voice made me realize how long it had been since she'd truly spoken to me anyway. I sorted through the remains of the wedding, a crumpled program I'd stuffed into my purse, still faintly smelling of spilled champagne. I set it aside, neither keeping it as a relic nor discarding it as trash. It was proof of a moment when the mask had been ripped away. Nights were hardest. I would sit by the window remembering her as a little girl pressing her face against the glass, waiting for fireflies. Back then, she believed in magic, and I believed in her. Now the gulf between us felt wider than the dark yard stretching past the hedges. Yet somewhere beneath the ache, a strange calm began to take root. I had not destroyed her life. I had simply refused to let the lie grow larger than the truth. A week later, the first letter arrived in my mailbox. The handwriting was uneven, the envelope plain. Inside, on a single sheet of paper, were words that steadied me more than any apology from Madison could have. "Thank you for telling the truth when no one else would. I'm filing for paternity. I want to be there for him. He deserves that much." It was signed simply Jason. 2 days after that came another envelope, this one heavier, cream-colored. The cardstock was embossed with Ethan Whitford's initials. I unfolded it slowly, bracing myself. "You didn't ruin my wedding. You saved my future. I can't imagine the courage it took to speak, but I'm grateful you did." His words were brief, but they lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying. I placed both letters in the top drawer of my desk, not to reread endlessly, not to frame, but to keep as proof that something good could grow out of wreckage. I did not feel triumphant, and I certainly didn't feel vindicated. What I felt was lighter, as if the truth had pruned away the rot, leaving me with room to breathe again. Madison remained silent. Perhaps she always would. Perhaps one day she would come to me, or perhaps she wouldn't. But I knew this much: I had done what a mother does even when it costs her. I had told the truth not out of spite, but to keep her from destroying herself and everyone else with the lies she clung to. In the evenings now, I returned to my garden hands, deep in the soil, listening to the quiet. The trash can, the folding chair, the glittering chandeliers, they all feel far away. What remains is my name, my truth, and a piece no one can take. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.